I want to talk just very briefly, as everyone else has done heroically, about what we're going through and what we're doing. In my case, with AI and with new technology more generally, in my case as a practitioner, and to give you really a practitioner's eye view, as Ian used the word struggle, and as I've really struggled, and I know a lot of other colleagues have struggled to work with these new techniques, because I've called this very short chat really the deluge of data. And we've been getting into this mire, I think, and this difficulty of just huge amounts of information to deal with for quite a long time. I wrote about this in a book called Statistics and the Public Sphere, all the way back in 2011 with my colleague Tom Crook, also at Oxford Brookes. And there we said, you know, it's just becoming very, very difficult for humanities scholars with the best will in the world, as we've already heard, probably trained a long time ago, to differentiate what to do with this huge tsunami of information. As early as 2010, Christine Borgman of UCLA talked about the data deluge, which was overwhelming the sciences, the hard sciences, I suppose, but that the humanities were even less well prepared because our training had really been bitty, bespoke, not kind of technologically advanced or informed really, and we've already heard about that as well, so I don't need to go into that. But now I think we've reached a point at which the acceleration of the aeroplane of new technology, I suppose we could use that image, has really started to surge, and we've gone with the throttle down, and we're taking off, and it's really worrying and even scaring some colleagues, because they're just not sure. They're not sure what to do in lots of humanistic and also humanistically informed or adjacent fields. Give you an example of Michael Bevan from UCL, where I took my PhD all those years ago. He talks about archaeology with spatial recognition technology, global geographic coverage of interrelationship, actively sensed data on search that's changing. All of it, they've been set to look and change at the same time as more spectral resolution technologies, expanding the range and literally the depth of what you can look at under the ground, vastly cheaper remote sensing, and of course vastly cheaper storage and time series data based on what you do, where you store, and how you use all of that GPS and all of that spectroscopy data. That's just a huge transformative moment in a humanities field. And I think we are still in that phase. It reminds me of the late 19th century, where we're not sure what's going to happen, and we're not sure how we're going to deal with all of these different kind of changes. Now that presents us with concerns, of course. We've already heard them about legibility or access, or the increasing autarky of the state system, lots and lots of problems, but it might also present us with challenges. I'll give you two examples. Is that recently I was the principal investigator on a really big project about rights of way and rights of access to the land in late 20th century Britain, the history of that topic. And I and my team could only really look at 3 areas with GPS data. We could only really work with, I think it was Cheshire, Essex in the east of England, and the West Riding of Yorkshire up in the kind of north of England. And that meant that the rest of GPS data on rights of way and rights of access, we couldn't do anything on that, and we could only just focus on 3 maps. Such was the kind of amount of data on all of these paths. And paths we found that, you know, even the Ramblers Association and even the councils hadn't found. Or I've just written a book about the Tony Blair new Labour governments in the late 1990s and early 2000s in the UK. Now there are 5,000 PDFs online just in Prem 49, Tony Blair's Prime Minister's papers, and they're just the ones that the archivists in the UK National Archives have scanned in, and they're building up online as PDFs, about 200 in each release batch. So you've got another 400 a year coming in, being released, but that leaves hundreds and hundreds of paper files in the National Archives. Even the online files I could not possibly go through for the book. So basically, what did I do? I just relied on my sense of what would be probably useful from the old archive, which had, yes, it had a search engine, but it was quite crude. And it also had the paper books still in the search room there in Kew, where you could trace across the reference numbers of old government archives. And even that example is without going, as I say, to the paper files that are still in the National Archives, and without going to any of the other electronic kind of sources that we could think about. The Guardian and the Financial Times, for instance, and the Times online from the era, newspapers, or, for instance, the government's web archive, which very inexpertly and very inaccurately saves all of the UK government's websites, or the ONS website, the Office for National Statistics website for statistics, and one could go on and on and on. And there's only one person in a traditional kind of lone wolf researcher model that we've been trained in, and that was impossible. So what did I do? I just did what I did on a book about Harold Wilson 20 years ago. I just shaped the chapters, one the economy, one the regions, one education, one healthcare, and I just went in and I tried to make sense of it as best I could with the excellent training I'd been provided in the 1990s, but probably not enough to deal just using my intuition and my kind of hunches, my green fingers. Alan Taylor talked about them in the 1960s. And I just got the sense that that's not going to be good enough next time, and probably the time after that, in the time that remains for us. And there are lots of examples. I'm going to wind up in a minute, don't worry. There are lots of examples of scholars who are trying to do other things and different things. And really, I feel, even as someone who's fairly tech savvy, I feel ill-equipped to know whether these were examples that I should follow and that I should myself, Ian used the word struggle, that I should struggle with, that I should grapple with. For instance, John Lawrence, historian of the 19th and 20th centuries at Exeter, he's working with Caspar Bielen from the Turing on 19th century newspapers, and the search engine plows through tens of thousands of these in the British Library, and it tries to think of the context of the language on, I don't know, crime, transport, dirt, whatever it is, and it tries to think about how those ideas were thought about, not now, but then. And I just lack the skills to be able to judge to what extent that machine learning is very useful and to which it's anchored in the reality then. So we have a problem, we have opportunities, but we have confusion. And I think that's very characteristic as a historian of technological change in governance. That's very characteristic of these periods, the 1840s, the 1890s, the 1950s, when this also happened, although probably at a slower and lower rate. So just to finish, I think we're left with, questions and to be open, given it's a workshop, rather than closed answers and closed ways of thinking. So the first question I would have is how are we supposed to adapt our training from long ago to these new techniques and new methods, which we are frankly not sure about? How will the greater power, just the raw power of compute as it grows, and the chip revolution and the storage revolution grows, how's that going to change when I've got, hundreds and hundreds of PDFs that I might want to set an agent to search through? How's that going to change it? Just at a very practical level. And at the same practical level, I am of indeterminate later middle age. To what extent does it make sense for mid-career and later career colleagues, including myself, to re-equip ourselves at all when we may have, even if the present funding disaster doesn't get worse, we may only have 10 or 15 years of work remaining. I say only. And lastly, I think philosophically, centrally, really critically, a really difficult and really central question, not a peripheral question or an epiphenomenal question, is how we see the humanities. How will that change fundamentally based on the fact that you can go through absolutely thousands of pages in an Excel workbook about, I don't know, the labour market in the 1990s, and then you can search PDFs, absolutely thousands of government PDFs, and then you can search, scores of government websites all about the labour market in the 1990s and produce an incredibly dense short book or academic article about, I don't know, government policy in that period, because that's what I've been writing about. But what will that be like? How can we imagine it? What will it mean to go into such crazy depth and also not be able to see a lot of the hidden wiring. So there is confusion, but there are chances to change, but we just don't know where those chances to change are going to, and to what extent, therefore, do we re-equip ourselves. So that was a very quick kind of practitioner's eye view, perhaps even a worm's eye view, a researcher's eye view in the darkness of the archives. But I hope it was helpful. Thank you.